Hi, and welcome to Lights of the Round Table. My name is Susanna, and boy, this is going to be a great stellar show, no pun intended. I have Emily, the founder of the Quantum Stellar Initiatives, with us today. She's hard to get because she's so very busy. And of course, her right hand in everything finance, I think. It's Nick Vergone. And thank you again for coming back because things are moving at lightning speed within the stellar blockchain. I mean, if we were looking and figuring out things last year, this year, what I've noticed is that we're seeing a whole bunch of projects and blocks and everything is developing behind the scenes. And that's why I wanted Emily to come back and explain to us and give us a 40,000 view of what's happening and how things are coming, because I think we're getting closer to certain protocols and expecting a lot of things to come our way. And anyways, welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me back, Susanna. It's always good to be with you.
Thank you so much. So tell us, I've been seeing so many ICOs, and those are the gosh, I'm missing the word now. Those are your
In,
first, the initial coin offerings, and people are wondering, how can this be? How are you able to create these offerings and nothing happens? And what is this related? And of course, I see relevance to what's happening on the BRICS world, outside in the finances, and I'm starting to see some of the dots, but people are not seeing that yet. So perhaps you can explain a little bit better what's going on.
yeah, definitely. I'm happy to do so. I think maybe before we get started, if we want to turn it over to Nick for a quick second, because Nick explains how SPACs works, and SPACs go hand in hand with the ICOs. So if people have that background knowledge in their head as they're learning about the ICOs, it'll make just so much more sense.
Okay. You mean in conjunction with the ICOs, right? Okay. Yeah, I mean, basically what Emily's referring to is the acronym SPAC, SPIC, which represents a special purpose acquisition vehicle. And what it is a security that's designed to perform a certain function in the future, and it gets essentially pre-funded for that purpose. And it could be a number of any different reasons for doing that. It could be for an acquisition of a company, for a public offering of a company, for distribution of assets. It could be any number of things. So it's a vehicle that's purposely created for a future event. And what we're seeing recently in the last several years in particular, SPACs came out in the early 1980s, and they were very, very small. Most of them were somewhere between $5 and $20 million in size. But in the last few years, there's been $900 billion worth of SPACs created, and they've come back dramatically because it's a very easy way to bypass all the red tape in terms of doing an initial public offering of a company. Rather than that, you set up a SPAC, you have the funding prepared, and it bypasses all of the things and the time constraints that IPOs cause. So what you're seeing is that it's been a very, very popular vehicle as of recent years. It works perfectly here because what Emily's doing is they're creating the developers, and she is developing the ICOs for whatever technologies or companies that are going to come as part of the changeover. But in the interim, the funding can be placed elsewhere, and the shells here are waiting just to be filled. They're just basically the receptacles waiting to be filled. So you can create the receptacle and explain what it's for, and the funding is elsewhere, sitting elsewhere, just waiting to really fulfill its obligation when things occur. So it's a very good structure, because if we had to do an initial public offering or something similar to that for every company that Emily and Stella Rusher and others are bringing out, we'd probably have like two of them done in the last 2 years, because it takes so long. There's so much bureaucracy. It's a whole gigantic process. This is a very ingenious way of doing it, and a way that also expedites the process without going through all the formal red tape. And you also make people aware of it prior to its coming, what it's for, what its purpose is. So when it does come, people already know. It's not like you do with an initial public offering nobody's ever heard of, where the company, nobody knows it yet, and you have to explain everything about it. It's kind of like a announcement of something to come. So yeah, it works. It's a very unique and very ingenious structure that they put together in order to build this infrastructure out.
Well, it sounds almost like like what people also do for startups in a sense.
Yeah, that's right.
Not only, and so this is a great then humanitarian input for the group. I mean, for your community, because I'm sure that even though there's some established companies coming in, I'm sure that this also facilitates some developers that are coming with novel ideas and they're already in white paper, ready to, it just expedites that process, right, Emily?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll add one thing to what Nick was saying earlier, because I 100% agree with what he said just now. But the one thing that people also want to keep in the back of their minds is, guys, it's not just about what happens in the normal 3D world when you're funding something. So for instance, Nick threw around these numbers, millions of dollars in fundraising rounds, and that's what you normally would do for a regular company. But in this case, we don't have to keep fundraising millions or hundreds of millions of dollars at a time, because the average ICO that we're doing, well, if it's like a metals or commodity, they could be as little as 300,000 XLM for the whole ICO, which, I mean, the price of XLM has changed in the last couple of days, but historically for the last couple of months, it's been roughly 10 XLM to $1. So we're talking about roughly 30,000 US dollars to fundraise for an entire commodity. And sometimes, we get close to it, so it can be less than 30,000. But then you have all these other monster projects, big organizations coming in, the companies, the projects, etc. And maybe they're 700,000 XLM. Guys, again, that's only 70,000 US dollars. So
Yeah.
it's mind-boggling how the white hats are really able to capture the fact that we are going into this RV. And of course, we know that the white hats are behind the revaluation of the metals as well, and the revaluation of the commodities. And so they can already price exactly what they need, which is why they can dictate, do we need, 500,000 for this one, $1 million extra for that one? It's pretty flexible, but because they know the numbers behind the scenes are the rough numbers, because the formula has been changing a little bit for the last couple of weeks, that way they can better plan what they need and they don't have to overspend here. They can predict or project over here. So if I kind of go back to your original question, Susanna, about, can you do this really well for humanitarian funding? Obviously, the answer is yes. And as we've all seen, if you've been paying attention to what's going on in QSI, we have tons of major brand name companies coming in, anywhere from your IBMs, your Oracles, all the way down to your BlackRock, Carlyle, stuff like that. But then we also have other kinds of really interesting projects. Like there's one called China Desert that many people had not heard of before. But that's one that's actually been existing for, I don't know, maybe over 10 years or so. And what that project does is it actually takes deserts and these farmers out in the middle of nowhere in China grow certain kinds of trees and certain kinds of bushes to actually turn the desert back into a forest. And then from there, after it's reforested, you can decide if you want to keep it as a forest or then go into further development. So we can see the evolution of how everything's changing, which gets very exciting, because it had been a theory of mine for about a year or so that the white hats were going to use places like Saudi Arabia or Qatar. And then now we know, obviously, with China, that they're going to go in and beautify and reforestify these desert areas so they can actually restore the Sahara Desert too. And so, obviously in Africa, if people have been studying the Sahara, they know that that used to be Greenland. It was beautiful architecture, amazing culture, and now it's just desert. Mm-hmm. And so you can really imagine how the whole world is going to start changing pretty quickly once all these projects are coming on board and they're fully funded. And you have, people behind the scenes putting the work in behind it.
It's beautiful. So
Suzanne, I'm sorry, let me just clarify one thing, because what I was referring to with regards to my initial statement was actually the funding of the actual project, because we don't talk about that. But like, for example, Emily and I were looking at SGB about a year and a half ago. We noticed there was one day where all of a sudden there was volumes of quadrillions of dollars, which I picked up basically by accident. And I right away messaged Emily, where there was quadrillions of dollars liquidity being injected into the project with nobody aware of it at all. And I just kind of found it by accident. but there's funding for the full projects that are more than likely in SPACs somewhere that we don't know about as of yet. These tokens are also, and this was the presentation that we did together, are also like SPACs in that they are a shell waiting for an event to happen in the future. And the beauty of it is, as Emily said, to create the shell takes very little money, which is great, because then you can do a whole bunch of them quickly, get them into place, and then use the other monies from wherever they're keeping them in, which could very well be other SPACs, into the build the real project itself out. So yeah, I mean, the way what you explained in terms of getting monies out, if you had to do an offering or even a venture capital round to do these, it would be much more costly, much more time intensive. So this is a perfect way to be able to put all the projects into place, but require very, very little money, and also allow us, fortunately enough, to participate, because this is like being in on the first round of venture capital. It's like buying Facebook at a nickel. And then, 2 years later, they go public and they're at multitudes of billions of dollars. So it's allowing those in the community to help build out. And at the same time, the cost structure is tremendously effective. So I just wanted to clarify that. I was speaking of the post funding of the ICOs. But yeah, I use the term SPAC to describe the coins themselves as well.
Well, what I find it exciting is that not only do we see this happening, but at the same time, simultaneously, we see better governance. We see more layers in this matrix of the quantum financial system being at the same time layering up and telling us things are going ahead. We have better securities. So Red Hat is a company. I know it was a cloud, and I know that IBM purchased it back in 2019, I think, but they were a big cloud services SaaS company. And, but anyways, IBM, Hyperledger, we have a lot more things coming. So give us a little bit of what's going on, because everything that we see is also related to what's going on. So that's why I'm saying that we're seeing a house not being built. We're seeing thousands of houses, and with it, the roads at the same time, and all the cables and wirings, if I can put it that way, the whole infrastructure. So it's really beautiful to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you mind if I screen share?
No, don't you have access?
Let me check.
I think I did give you access. Yeah, multiple participants.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to fly through these pretty relatively quickly, because I can send the document over to you, and then people can go back and actually review the notes that they want to. But a quick overview. So, because you mentioned Hyperledger earlier, Susanna, and I want to touch on this really briefly, because this was kind of the starting point of a lot of my really big research last year. Because when I found IBM Hyperledger, it was actually through World Bank, UN, IMF documents from like 2016, 18, and 19 that people had not looked. I mean, it obviously exists in the ecosystem, but people had never read before. And I certainly had never read it before until last year. And as I dug through them, I was like, it struck me because it kept mentioning Ripple, XDC, Zinfin, and IBM. I'm like, where's Stellar in all this? And then I remembered, whoa, IBM is one of Stellar's biggest partners. So it must be code for something. So I started digging into it, and it was broken down into basically 3 phases. And this map that you see over on the right-hand side, that's actually a map by, there's like a Twitter entity called XX and a whole bunch of numbers, and he's just brilliant. I don't know who he is, but I'm guessing he's probably a white hat, because everything he's been putting out has been used by a lot of the Stellar developers, which, just further validates what he's been looking at. So if we look at phase 1, over here on the right-hand side, won't read through the notes, but you can see in the red, bolded, highlighted words, we're looking at Ethereum, something called PBFT, the Practical Byzantine Fault Tolerance. And what does that all mean? It means at some point, those of us who've been studying QFS, the Q plan, and the necessity of moving all the assets out of like dirty blockchains into these clean white hat quantum blockchains, a lot of it has to do with moving Ethereum and Bitcoin. And so phase 1 talks almost entirely about how do you actually move Ethereum and Bitcoin into Stellar. So I think that's really beautiful because it talks about it from the IBM perspective, so it's no longer a conspiracy theory. So if we move on to phase two, this group in the middle, bevel cactus, et cetera, this is all about how do you actually implement quantum security? And that's another really big topic that we've been talking about for a long time. So again, guys, it's great to know that a company as massive as IBM Hyperledger is actually the one behind the scenes putting this together. Now, if we move on to phase three, now we're talking about actually building the quantum ecosystem that many of us have been talking about, otherwise known as Protocol 20. And when people talk about Protocol 20, a lot of them don't know it actually is referring to Stellar Protocol 20. Sometimes people use it agnostically, having no idea it belongs to the Stellar ecosystem. And so here's where we're going to start to see something called smart contracts, which we've talked about before, which is essentially just very sophisticated programming language. Instead of one contract that says A through B, it includes all these permutations where you can have billions or trillions of permutations to account for all of the different avenues that your contract needs to weave in and out of to accommodate for all the growth and the movement or the restrictions that you need. So through a network of smart contracting, that's how the white hats and the programmers were actually developing the entire quantum matrix across all the different industries combined. Before I go on, Nick, is there anything that you want to add to any of these slides?
No, just that with regards to smart contracts, it's also a process of decentralization. So you have all these different nodes that no one person controls all of them, so that there's a kind of a democratic process when something goes through, so that nobody that might have a large control over a bunch of nodes can get something through that is not meant to get through. So by doing it that way, you're taking out the control mechanism of anybody interfering with getting get the smart contracts completing the route all the way through to the end. So that's very big, because that's the whole process of blockchain is decentralization, taking out a controlling power over the whole thing, and this structure is doing that exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to add on to that because that's a very interesting topic that we don't really press on too often, but I think it's important to know is one of the really interesting things with Stellar is that it's actually a hybrid, a public and a private blockchain, which a lot of people don't realize. And so where you have that private aspect of it is at the quantum level, at the governance level, this is where the control mechanism comes into place. These are the smart contracts that are being managed by the white hats through organizations like AI Verify Foundation, right? As we've been discussing in QSI, AI Verify is essentially an organization combined from different, very important, well-respected AI organizations, education, and government, but it's all around the world. So I think it's like 10, 15 different countries who are in this organization there to kind of make sure that AI ML does not go overboard and becomes, let's say the WEF version of it that you see in the movies. So it's going to be the clean, good quantum version. But then after that, everything that Nick said is absolutely correct. So how we interact with the system on a day-to-day basis, just normal everyday people, completely decentralized. And so that's a really important distinction because I want people to understand that this is nothing like Bitcoin, nothing like Ethereum.
And we'll go and explain a little bit of what's going to happen to Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Yeah.
Later on.
So if this image is actually a really great analogy that one of our friends in QSI made. It's her name is Hawkeyes. And when she was trying to explain, how would you describe the QFS to somebody who's never learned about any of this and has no technology background? She thought about quilting. And I thought that was such a great analogy because I don't even know how to quilt, but this made a lot of sense to me. So if you look at all these different patches, these individual patches of the quilt, they can be put together in different styles, different patterns, different designs. But at the end of the day, there's a certain structure of how they need to be put in order. That way it flows and it's systematized. And then once each individual square is finished, you can then arrange the quilt however you want to and whatever pattern you want. So I kind of just threw a couple different categories out there. These are not, stagnant by any means. This was just, more for my personal reference, so people can kind of see what kind of categories of assets have been ICO'd through the Stellar blockchain. So you can see, commodities banks, CBDCs, payment rails over here, self-banking, passive income assets, you got your military, your quantum governance. Over here, you've got, Jacera type of stuff, real estate, rebuilding infrastructure, your energy companies out there. You have your space exploration. So over time, there will be more and more kinds of categories of companies coming in here. But at least this gives you a nice overview of some of the hundreds of assets that have already come on. Actually, there are a couple of thousand of assets that have already come on, but just about 200 since in like the last 7 months.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. Nick, do you want to add anything?
No, just the only thing is that when people talk about, is this real, is stellar, XRP is the center of the, is there anything else built that has commodities, banks, CBDCs, payment rails, financial market infrastructure, reconstruction? There's not. So if we change over to the QFS, how are people going to do business if they're not this in place already to be able to move? Because you can't have fiat businesses and a quantum blockchain finance system. That makes no sense. So anybody who doesn't see this I don't get it, because this is the only place. I don't know of any other blockchain that has all of these things. None of them. So this is just a validation of the fact that Stellar will be the centerpiece of the QFS ecosystem.
Yeah,
absolutely. It has everything there,
Yeah, and for me, I just feel like it's like the big hub of a railway system, and then you have all these other ledgers like your XRP ledgers or Syncfin ledgers, your Songbirds and other company, your Algo and coming, and just like a highway, when you go on a highway with loops, they'll all have to come into the main. They all have to somehow touch on Stellar, because that's where everything is going. That's where our everyday life. All of what we do is going to be there. So go ahead. So the tree of infinite quantum awesomeness. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly what you two were talking about a second ago. And in the words of our friend Sinjin, who's also in our QSI group, and he's been amazing to work with. He's actually one of the developers. At first we were like, what is Stellar? And we're starting to put together what could Stellar look like. And so the concept of Stellar started to grow. It went from, okay, maybe it's just the payment infrastructure, or maybe it's the like the personal payments, but not the industrial payments, right? But then also it became, no, it's actually more, because we have the stable coins, we have the CBDCs, we have the payment infrastructure rails coming in. And as I started adding more and more, it's like, oh my gosh, what do we not have in here? So Sinjin's like, there's almost nothing that isn't in Stellar. So when you ask, what is in Stellar, the correct question is, what is Stellar not these days? And so this is just a loose framework of what actually has been coming into Stellar. And you can see that you've got the wrapped assets, which is all this, all the existing financial ecosystem moving in with the governance layer. Then you have, what we mentioned at the beginning of the call, all the commodities, the stock markets, the bonds, everything, right? That's like the government infrastructure coming in. But then you have the other companies coming through. Even the ones that are not on the stock market are now going to be joining the Stellar ecosystem as well. You have your quantum voting, which we talked about in the past, right? Because we all know that with Jacera, you can't have hackable voting systems like, Dominion and Seidel, et cetera. So you have to find a way to root it in an immutable structure. And the only way to do that is through blockchain. But it happens to be that they're going to be using the Stellar blockchain for quantum voting. And then, of course, you have, your NFTs, which we've talked about very briefly in the past. But I think one common misperception that most people have is that if you're not, with QSI or people who are in the Stellar ecosystem, most people see NFT as like art or music, and that's it. It's so much more, guys. This really includes, contracts, IDs, like government IDs, medical records, travel history, real estate, business contracts, almost anything that you can possibly think of, because that's how you're going to start to automate and secure business languages at the same time too. And then when you go into more like the leaves of the trees, kind of like this, how everything's sprouting and looking nice and beautiful, then you have all the self-banking assets that, Nick and I have been talking about for the last couple of months. You also have loyalty and rewards tokens too. So it's really everything that people can possibly think of is all coming into Stellar. And then, as time progresses, we start to see more and more little categories pop up as well. So it's a really beautiful organic structure, which is why I think the tree of life is a great analogy for it, because you have the deep roots of all the programming, and now we're seeing the fruits of the tree trunk and the leaves and everything start to sprout in real time.
Wow. Can I add something? I'm looking at this and we're talking about smart contracts, and you're talking about government bonds, and we're talking how we're going to be, with our IDs, health IDs, banking, everything. Imagine. And I remember that once, I think you were in another podcast, you mentioned the legal language. And I think that this is what better place than to create an infrastructure like the quantum financial system that not only handles the finances, but at the same time, you are actually peeling off that layer of intermediaries of lawyers, because now you'll be able to have across the board a consistent form of contracts around the world. I mean, suddenly, we're taking down the bar, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry. I'm thinking, and I'm talking, and I'm listening to you, and I'm going like, wait a second. This also takes the legal system into a whole new level that you actually don't really discuss. So I think this is great, fantastic, because everybody will have to be on the same level playing field, and that's what we're seeing with BRICS.
Absolutely. I don't know, Nick, if you want to jump in on that or not.
No, the only thing I'll add on that is that with regards to laws and everything and legal contracts and stuff, this takes away the ability to interpret them the way you want to interpret them, and it takes away the ability to manipulate them. So once the laws are in place and the voting and all, once the structure's in place, it's immutable. There's no tampering with it. There's no interpretation or, I think it means this or that. It lays it all out in black and white. And that's the beauty of it, because then there can be no manipulation of the system.
Yeah, it's quite a matrix. Go ahead, Emily. Continue then.
Yeah, so the only thing I want to add to that is, so a couple of weeks ago, we were doing a series of calls on Red Hat, which is a really big company that you mentioned earlier, Susanna. And you're absolutely right. So Red Hat they do like more Linux and a lot of like the programming, the cloud stuff behind the scenes. And they were IBM's largest acquisition ever in history. And so, that's a big clue that they're very, very important for the ecosystem. But as we were going through the various Red Hat projects, I came across a lot of their, not just interesting projects, but also interesting quotes. And one especially by the CEO of Red Hat, and how he talks about how through the use of something called not just AIML. So AIML stands for artificial intelligence, machine learning. But now we're talking about generative machine learning, which is a whole different kind of machine learning. And the short version of that is, I think most people understand the nature of generative. It means, repeating patterns over and over. But when you couple that with quantum programming, then the iteration takes place faster and faster. So we're talking about millions, if not billions of iterations in a split second, as opposed to over years or decades of time. So it's a very fast learning curve. And how they're using this is they can pick up intentions on top of this too. So they can actually look at the patterns of which people interact, and then they can look at the intentions of how people interact, combine the two together in a scientific approach, and then bake that into a program. And how it spits out is the CEO of Red Hat was actually talking about how one of the intentions of Red Hat is when the customers, so Red Hat's customers start to adopt and implement Red Hat technology into their framework, their ecosystem, they're supposed to end up getting rid of a lot of their staff. They're supposed to downsize by using Red Hat, is what they're saying. They're supposed to start automating the entire system so that people no longer have to work in those, as an example, menial labor, like warehouse jobs or sending emails or doing accounting work. A lot of the stuff can be done away with through smart contracts that you guys were just mentioning a second ago. So it's really insane how much automation there is, which of course really affects industries like the legal system, like the medical industry, right? Banking, obviously a big one. And so there's so much change that's going to be coming very, very soon.
I know, imagine accounting and banks and everything, or gee, that's what I was looking for. My wish is coming true.
I think all of ours, especially
Yeah.
probably the most.
Yeah.
So if we move on to this slide, this is a slide that we presented with you, Susanna, back many months ago when we did a call with Jason Q. For anybody who's watching this on the replay, we did a brilliant call with Jason Q talking about what is the QFS and how do we know it's coming to Stellar? And so this was, I don't know, maybe like a month after that. And so this is back in January of this year. Busan created the world's first decentralized digital commodity exchange, which is really significant because not only is it a commodity exchange, right, which we've never had done before, but on top of it, that really kicked off a whole series of events. So for instance, like Stellar joined the CFTC. I think it was like a day or two later, the Commodities Future Trading Commission, which is a big entity that's going to be replacing the SEC in America. But then ever since then, we've also seen just proof after proof, article after article from all over the world of different countries, different governments adopting tokenized commodities. So Nick, do you want to comment on anything really quickly?
Yeah, I mean, first, the CFTC should be regulating the industry going forward because all of these are commodities, regardless of what might be in them. They're still considered commodities, and that's why the SEC is going to be no longer. There's going to be no need for the SEC going down the road. But to actually see the commodities being digitized is huge because in the commodities exchanges and the commodities industry, there's so much manipulation and fraud and all kinds of things going on that it's because you only have a couple of large banking players like JP Morgan and Citibank, Bank of America, that they control the whole market. So they do whatever they want. They move the prices, they naked short, they do all kinds of things. So all this is essentially eliminating all of that and eliminating their involvement in all of that. So, and that's huge because they control they control almost all financial markets. So to see it actually being done this way shows that there's going to be a digitized commodity exchange, a digitized stock market. All the markets that we have today have to become digital because you can't have a financial system that's of one structure and then the rest of it not. So this is huge because this is the start of digitized trading on the blockchain. And we've always talked about it. People are like, oh yeah, well, here it is. It's right in front of you. So yeah, I mean that was a huge announcement when that came out because it's showing it's actually being done, and they're not going to be the only ones doing it. Everybody all over the world is going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this slide really kind of sets the tone for the next couple of slides we're going to go through, and I'll go through them a little bit faster because it's more just proof after proof now. So first of all, FedWire has been a big topic that people have been talking about for, I guess, the last couple of months or so, because FedWire actually gets implemented this month in the next couple of days. But what's really interesting is most people think about FedWire or even just the entire QFS flowing through Ripple. And guys, that's actually not the case. It's flowing through Stellar. And over the next few slides, you'll start to see why it's being programmed into Stellar and not through Ripple. So first of all, this article, and then also the IBM website itself talks about this. And in FedWire, they say, they mentioned IBM again, they mentioned Red Hat this time, but then Portex, et cetera, and then Oracle and Microsoft. So guys, again, these are all partners of Stellar. It doesn't mention Ripple whatsoever. But more importantly, as we kind of scroll through, and this is just more documentation from FedWire's website this time, but if we actually move into the Stellar ecosystem protocols, I want to go through these because this is actually what solidified in my mind that everything was coming into Stellar as opposed to, it's a coincidence that Stellar's partners happen to be building the blockchain or building the programming behind the blockchains, right? Because you could say, some of these banks are also partnered with Ripple. Some of them are also partnered with XDC. So why is it your blockchain and not my blockchain? So when you go through the SEPs, this is actually how you see for yourself with your own eyes in the programming code why it has to be the Stellar ecosystem and not the other ones. So the first one, step number one, basically the very first step ever written in history for the entire Stellar ecosystem back in 2017, but they updated it last year. And what they updated to add were very interesting topics. So for instance, like they added the ability to interoperate through NFTs with fiat, crypto, stocks, bonds, commodities, real estate, right? Like all the stuff that Nick had just mentioned a second ago. And they also added anchor assets like USD dollar, Bitcoin, and then in the future, they're going to be bringing in Ethereum and other blockchains, but they even mentioned the address of real estate investment companies here, right? So even last May is when they already started to update their own protocol to add this layer. And so that's really interesting because there's no other blockchain out there that has any of this programming baked into their language. And if we move on to SEP 8, this is literally regulated assets. So many people have been studying a company called D-Stock, which is spelled here, DSTOQ. And what they do is, I'm going to move my box. It says, this is the first STF, so Stellar Development Foundation, their very first investment through their enterprise fund. And what they do is they actually bridge, right, security tokens to emerging markets. And they were looking for which blockchain to use. And if you read this paragraph here, it basically says, out of all the different blockchains they were doing their research on, the only one they could have possibly picked was Stellar. And that's why they formed a partnership back in 2018. So guys, 2018, that's how long they've been building this in secret where none of us ever knew about it. So I just think that's phenomenally very ninja of them.
I love your description.
So, and this one actually made me laugh even more. This one, so Susanna, anybody who is not in QSI probably will think this is crazy, but I like to use food analogies to help teach people because it helps them to kind of cement that topic in their head a little bit better. So in QSI, we call this the Stellar French Onion Soup. Although St. John and Hawkeye have now nicely dubbed it the crab pot. The crab trap. But the reason why it's called the crab trap or the French onion soup is because we're now looking at multiple layers of assets coming into Stellar. And why they call it the crab trap is because they've put into these protocols where once those assets flow into the Stellar ecosystem, it's a one-way gate. So as much as we talk about bridges, and a bridge connects two different points, these are not actually bridges. These are more like burn bridges. So what happens is as the fiat comes on board, as the other crypto from other blockchains come on board, or the real estate, or the securities, or the commodities, whatever it is, as they flow one way directionally, what ends up happening in this programming language itself, it burns that bridge so that it cannot backflow back on the original platform. It's now stuck on the Stellar ecosystem. And guys, the interesting thing about this is it also includes XRP. It also includes Bitcoin and Ethereum. And that's how you know that it's a one-way system. Everything only flows in. It does not flow back out.
Wait, are you hinting that there is a limit, a life limit on XRP, Bitcoin, and Ethereum?
I am hinting at so many different things, Susanna. It's so juicy at how many things I'm hinting at. But I don't want to get bogged down on XRP on this particular call because we have another exciting call coming in the future.
Yes, we do.
But one other thing I want to add to this is many of us, I know you've been talking about this as well, Susanna, not just you and us, but you and your other guests as well. We've been talking about Bretton Woods 3. And even Bretton Woods 3 is mentioned in SEP 40 of the Stellar Protocol System. And so, for people who are not aware, Bretton Woods 3 is when you go not just back onto the gold back system, guys, it's the backing of all physical precious metals and commodities in the entire world, bar none. And so, what do they do with all this physical stuff? They have to tokenize it. Where are they tokenizing it? Into Stellar. And these are some of the ICOs we've been doing since last year, and we're still doing them to this day. Actually, yesterday we just launched the cobalt from Morocco, right? So every couple of days we launch a new commodity or a new metals. And so everything's flowing in, guys. It's very, very amazing. But also, one thing I want to kind of piggyback off of is this notion of PBFT, the practical Byzantine fault tolerance that I mentioned earlier. So when I did a call with you, I think it was maybe last time or two calls ago, Susanna, we talked about how PBFT is kind of like the gotcha moment. And that's before I learned about SEP 40. So, it's kind of like in hindsight, everything's much more clear. And if I go back and I revisit PBFT for a quick second, this is when you'd burn the real bridges, right? Because on step 40, you already have the programming language that says, okay, you can't turn backwards, right? But it still exists there. It's just kind of stuck. But what PBFT does is it says, if the internet, the global internet, crashes down to, depending on Bitcoin or Ethereum, they have a different tolerance level, but it's around, let's say, the 50 to the 60% level, right? So the global internet has to crash down to 50 or 60% level. Then all of Bitcoin and Ethereum and their mining, the blockchain, like every single token that exists on those networks crashes to zero permanently. They will no longer be able to survive. So that's how you crash it. Like there's no going back, no going back. So that's their final catch-all. So it's kind of like all of these layers and all of these traps built on top of one another to make sure that the cabal has no way back out afterwards.
So what happens to the people who are listening to this? This is the first time they're listening to any of this. They own Ethereum. They own a little bit of Bitcoin, and they just heard this and say, what is going to happen to the little bit of investment I have on Bitcoin and Ethereum? And there must be, what's going to happen?
That's a really good question. So what they're building right now, and they've been building this for the last, I want to say, maybe year and a half plus, is there's something called anchors. And so this is how you port assets over, whether it's fiat or commodities or whatever. They have anchors for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other tokens as well. And what they're doing is they're doing something called a wrapped asset. And so all that means is if you're not familiar with blockchain technology, a token can only exist on its own ecosystem. So Bitcoin can only exist on Bitcoin's blockchain. So how does Bitcoin come into the Stellar ecosystem? You have to have a mechanism in place called a wrapped asset. So when Bitcoin flows in, the native or original Bitcoin doesn't come over. Instead, it gets held in almost like this, let's call it a safety deposit box. And what the person will get as the investor is a wrapped Bitcoin that's housed on the Stellar ecosystem. So, original Bitcoin here, wrapped Bitcoin on Stellar over here, and it'll have the same value or very similar value. And they can go and they can use and trade or, continue to invest whatever they want to over here in Stellar. But then one day when, PBFT kicks in, then this version drops to zero. So that's why it's better for them to move their assets in sooner than later before all the droppings to zero.
Okay, there we go. Good. That clarifies, because I know I have a lot of people that are a little bit trembling a little bit and wondering what to do with those coins.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that we get, pretty often, almost daily as well. And one thing I'll add to that is I don't have a slide for it on this particular call, but I have it, for later slides if you want a copy of it. But what they're planning to do is they're planning to raise the price of a lot of the anchors in the future. So if you come in before certain deadlines, which I'll say, to be safe, let's say like before October or November of this year, it'll be cheaper to bring your assets into Stellar. If you move it on afterwards, but definitely by, next year, 2024 afterwards, it's going to cost you a lot more to move your assets into Stellar. So it definitely pays to be first to market.
And I'm sure the banks are doing that, right?
Yes, actually, a really great question. I was going to get to that later, but so on July 2nd was a really massive deadline, Susanna. You may have heard of this before through, some of your other contacts or some of your research, but in all of the quantum compliant banks, that was the deadline for them to actually on-ramp and upgrade their quantum ecosystems, like their technology on the computers. And so I did hear there's about like 27% of the global banks that were unable to meet that requirement, that deadline. And from what I've been gathering from the white hats we work with, is about half of them have been given extension to come on later. So they're basically moving their assets to get on board right now. And the other half will become non-compliant and they're going to be swooshed away. So
Consolidation is happening.
Yeah, that's Nick's favorite word. Nick, did you want to add anything to the last slide?
No, not really. You covered it well.
Okay. So this one and the next one, I'm going to jump through because I think this is like what people have in the back of their minds. What happens to people who are not in Stellar? because getting into Stellar can be a headache for many people trying to learn, how does this operate? How do I create a wallet? There's so many scammers. What do I do? It's very cumbersome in the beginning. It's not user friendly because we're still going through that beta testing phase. So what they've done is this protocol and the next protocol actually helps that effort. So ATP3 stands for account transfer. Oops, this is not my PDF. Account transfer permissionless payment protocol. And what it does is it says it can be used in contexts where the recipient does not yet have an account, or maybe they have an account, but they don't have the money to fund getting the assets over here. So what is a great example of that? Because they say this is really great for large scale issuers and it's excellent for conditional transfers. So the way that it's going to be used and has been used is the banks that have your bank account in it, right? All over the world, all these quantum compliant banks, you as an individual, so let's say Susanna, you have a bank account and you might have more than one bank account. And maybe, you don't want to go and actually cash out every single penny that you own and then onboard it manually through your bank account or through an ATM onto Stellar. So what the banks will do on your behalf now is they're creating a Stellar wallet for you in your name. So when everything does move and everything is, announced publicly at whatever point that you're ready to, you can go and actually claim your wallet in your name with the exact dollar to dollar ratio that you had sitting in your bank account. But what that tells me, but what's even great about this is there's been a lot of rumors out there for years now, Susanna, and I was even guilty of saying this at the same time too last year, or last couple of years until recently, is so many truthers out there have been saying that, hurry, cash out of all of your money in your bank, take out, your banking, checking, your savings account, cash out of your money market account, break your 401k, panic, sell off, get into, physical gold and silver, or get into Ripple. Guys, that's not the case at all, because the white hats have confirmed everything is being taken care of down to your money market accounts, down to your bonds, okay? So they're really thinking of every single bridge possible to make sure this transition is as seamless and as, headacheless as possible for everybody in the whole world.
Can I add one thing also?
Yeah.
No, and on top of this, last week, Stellar Org announced that they're preparing themselves to serving the unbanked. So this is not only just for us that have banks, but they're setting it all up. So even those people that don't even ever have had a bank account will be able to have their own Stellar wallet, their own account. So I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the greatest beta tests for that was last December in Ukraine. I think a lot of people probably remember that through the UN, right? Through the UN, Stellar actually partnered with them to do USDC payments for people all over Ukraine because, obviously with the fake war going on. Guys, there was a real war, but now it's already at the fake war stage. People have been displaced and there have been a lot of migrants. And so they've been testing this behind the scenes, last December, of giving people a Stellar wallet. So all they need to have is a phone. And as long as they can access the phone, they can access the wallet, they can access their own money. And they can decide if they want to keep it in the Stellar ecosystem and pay, through off-ramping things like MoneyGram or through Visa, MasterCard, etc. Or if they want to off-ramp it into fiat and change it to their local currency. So all this is possible, guys. Yeah. And then this one I thought was another really great protocol because this talks about how we, as people who are now swimming in this beta test on the Stellar ecosystem before it really launches live to the world, a lot of what we're doing, even without starting our own humanitarian project, just by participating in these ISOs, are actually fundraising for the QFS. Because think about it this way, right now we have on average 1,000 to 2,000 investors per project. That's not a lot of people in the whole world. That's less than a fraction of a percent. So how do you get, up to 8 billion people to get on-ramped? How do you get them to not just, create all, the banks can create the accounts, but how do you actually fund the accounts? How do you make it where they can actually accept the assets? Because typically you have to buy Stellar XLM and then you exchange the XLM, you put it into your reserve wallet, and then that way you can actually accept the asset into your wallet. Well, here, this is issuer account funding, which means a portion of everything that we do for these ICOs actually helps fund all these billions of people around the world that have no idea this is happening. So just by participating in the ICO, we're already part of a humanitarian project to help billions of people. It's really incredible.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. Nick, do you want to add anything?
No, you're good.
Okay. So I want to talk more about security now because I know people are always worried about security and especially when it comes to blockchain, there's a lot of talk about how, you get that new wallet, you got to write down something called the seed phrase, which is a series of passwords, which you have to write them down in the right order with the right spelling. Because if you don't, or if you botch this should have been number one, but I wrote it as number two, and I can't remember which one came first, you lose your wallet. Or there's something called a secret key, which is this really, really long series of numbers and letters. And if you misplace that, or if you don't know and you accidentally gave it to a scammer, well, now they have access to your entire account. And so people have been freaking out. People have been targeted. I've personally lost 3 wallets in my lifetime, 2 through scammers, 1 because I misplaced my secret key. And there have been countless other people on a daily basis who get scammed and hacked, or like me, they misplace their information. And so, we don't want that to happen. The white hats want to safeguard everybody, but this also really protects people who are not just, let's say one common fear is that you have to be very technically savvy to be in blockchain. This removes that fear because now you can be elderly, you can be a young kid, right? You can be somebody who's visually hearing impaired, maybe with learning disabilities. It won't matter anymore because with something like Federation Protocol, now your security is tied to your biometrics. So they're building, I don't know if it's going to be your Touch ID or your retinal scan or something else, but this will be part of your own security. That way people cannot hack into your system. And unlike what's happening right now, where it's like you log into your account once and then you're done, and you can make all these different trades, in the future, what they're doing is every single operation that you do, whether it is adding a new asset or making a trade or selling an asset or sending it to your friend and family, whatever it is, every single transaction will be quantumly secured. They're going to ask for your biometrics or something like that to secure it. That way, if a scammer were to ever get a hold of it, maybe they just logged into it, but now they can't make any trades because they can't fulfill the next transaction, the next security layer of it.
Yeah, security has been one big subject, and I know that a lot of people have lost the seeds and they're wondering. It's like, what? And I said, don't worry. I just heard that you can recuperate it sometime coming soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So, ta-da, here it comes. There's something called account abstraction. And this has been something that's been very popular with Ethereum. They've been doing a lot of testing in the background through Ethereum. And what gets really interesting is I think, many people, at least if they've been following you, Susanna, they're probably already aware of the Ethereum upgrade that's happened recently called the Shanghai upgrade. Now, part of the Shanghai upgrade was a component called ERC 4337. And in that ERC upgrade, there was something called account abstraction, which is right here. And it says basically that, anybody who has lost their keys are able to find it through another source where they can kind of shard it together and build your secret key back up. So if you've lost your keys, you can find it again through this quantum system. So they've been testing this for the last couple of months on the Ethereum blockchain, and now they're moving it over into the Stellar blockchain as well, so that once it happens, you have governance over every single blockchain, every single wallet. So you'll be able to have account abstraction for every single crypto wallet that's ever been made. Wow. And so not only, big wow. So what it means is, if you make a wallet in the future, like your 7+ billion people in the world, they'll then pre-register their wallet with all their contact information, all their KYC AML information, and they'll be set for life. But simultaneously, what they're doing is they're now backdating it. They're going to retrofit it to all the other wallets. So even people like me who lost my wallet last year, they can still recover it.
What an accomplishment. Wow. That's a big one. That is a big one because we were always beta. The first ones always get nubbed, the first people that always try the new territory, we always get nubbed and jinxed.
Yeah.
So no, that's great. It's good.
And one thing I'll add to this before we go to the next slide is I find it really funny because if you think about like all the cabal that try to hide their assets in Bitcoin and Ethereum, they're screwed.
Oh yeah.
They can't hide it because through account abstraction, they can crack into those wallets too.
Darn, I didn't think about that one. I thought I would have it. Oh my gosh, that's a great one.
It has to be done this way because imagine, look, people that have some technical knowledge
Mm.
get all messed up with their account wallets. Imagine somebody who never had money in their lives, never had an account in their lives, and has to set all this up. If they didn't have this, it would be pandemonium. There'd be so many people who wouldn't know what to do. They don't know what they would, it would be chaos. It has to be that they have the ability to do this. Otherwise, it would be just pandemonium.
No, and I love the way that also I remember that when we started, it was that the ledger, you needed to have a USB port, you had to have something else, a flash drive or something, right? And now even those are I'm reading, and even those are being considered. So it's a great wow. I think I love it. I love it because there's nothing worse than to sleep and wondering where you left the little piece of paper, or even if you put it in many places, you can still lose things inadvertently, and things, you don't want to lose your life savings, for example. So for some, right?
Absolutely. But since we're talking about losing things in lost wallets, the next big topic that people always ask about is what happened to my wallet where a hacker, a scammer got a hold of it? Is there any recourse for me there? Can the white hats do anything? And now I'm happy to say that the answer is yes. And I only got this information this past Thursday, guys. So this is not coming in Protocol 20, at least not that I know of. It'll probably be coming after Protocol 20 because this takes a lot more programming, a lot more strategic know-how to kind of put all the pieces together, because they have to go and now chase down all the scammers. So we're talking about not just the cabal and the cabal's wealth. We're talking about all the little minions now who are running around in the ecosystem, terrorizing people in blockchain, right? Because there are thousands, if not, hundreds of thousands of scammers out there. So in the future, on the screen, it says Raf Kirill, stands for Russia Air Force. He is the U.S. Space Force counterpart for the Russian military. He's one of the developers that we work with over in QSI. But he mentioned how there's going to be in the future a refund program. And so again, guys, the reason why it has to be Stellar as an ecosystem and not Ripple or any others is because baked into Stellar Protocol 17 was something called clawback. And that was a necessity for the program to have a clawback for them to even be considered for the QFS. If there was no clawback functionality, it could not be the hub of the QFS. And that's why the other blockchains could not be chosen. So now we know that it won't matter if you've been scammed by a hacker. There is still going to be something for you in the future to help give you peace of mind, to make sure that you are safe, because the white hats, literally, as we've been saying for years, are in control.
Yeah, but what a big heart, because your community has been doing this for about 2 years. You have people early on, and I would say about the last year or so, you've incremented that community. But now there's a little bit more, like 30,000 new people, 20,000 new people that don't know the history. And I have heard so many people getting scammed because they don't go through their readings. They don't take their time. They just think that they can just go to Lobster and says, oh, I'm going to buy, I don't know, I'm going to buy XRP. And we know that there's only one good XRP out of, the 6 or 7 offerings. And if you don't know the right one, then you go to the scammers. And stories like this have also incremented, I think, in the last month or two, because your community has grown so much. And it's really, people are just a little too excited, a little bit without reading anything. They're being a little bit careless, thinking that everything is okay. So my hat's off to the white hats for noticing this and wanting to even help those who are a little bit irresponsible and a little bit too anxious to jump on the boat with us.
Absolutely. And, I was having a conversation with Nick about this earlier today. So I don't know, Nick, do you want to kind of give a little highlight of what our discussion was? Because I do have some more updates.
Yeah, basically what I was saying was that there are people out there, no names mentioned, that have chosen to work with developers that weren't KYC properly, and that they're not, they haven't been approved. So, and they're putting out a bunch of tokens, and a lot of people, knowing the reputation of the person affiliated with them, are buying these tokens, even though they've been warned repeatedly that these are not legitimate tokens because the developers were not, KYC'd and approved by SPIA, and they're doing it anyway, again, because of the relationship or the reputation. So my question to Emily was, there's something called Cheesecake that will be reimbursing people that may have bought scam tokens in the past unknowingly. But my question was, if somebody is knowingly doing this, then why should they be reimbursed for something that they choose to participate in? And then, you can take it from there.
Yeah. So, and because this is a question that I have been asking Ben from Stellar Russia, and I won't go into too much detail about why Stellar Russia, but suffice to say, Stellar Russia is, as people will learn over time, going to be one of the most instrumental, but to some degree also fundamental developing teams of the entire QFS ecosystem. And so Stellar Russia is spearheaded by somebody named Ben that we work with in QSI. So I forwarded Nick's messages over to Ben because when we had our call on Cheesecake about a month ago, it was a question that he and I had discussed, but he had been pretty vague in his reply to me, where he's saying, yes, there will be a difference between people who knowingly got scammed, like they were knowingly participating in the scam, versus innocent people who had no idea that they were scam assets and they unknowingly and accidentally bought into it, right? So it's, again, guys, it's the intention that they're trying to track right now. And so he was very vague with me a month ago. So with Nick's help, I was able to kind of prod and poke him a little bit more today. And this was his response. He said, in each case, it would be looked into separately. If a person is a complete idiot and he did not know that he was investing into a scam token, well, then of course we're going to do something about it. They're going to get close to their original investment. But if they know that they're investing into a scam, then they're going to get zero back and they're going to get trolled hardcore. And so I was like, zero back is in like zero investment back, because to reiterate what Nick was saying with the whole Cheesecake thing is, for anybody who has not seen our Cheesecake update call from about, again, a month ago or so, Ben had talked about how, you put in, let's say 100 XLM into an asset, right? Because 100 XLM back then was about $10 US worth. And what the Khazarians were doing in the background is they were terrorizing people, and they're saying, you got to cash out. These are all scams. You have to swap back out into XDC or off ramp it back into US dollar. But because they know that the system has no liquidity right now, right? Like if you look at the order books, there's not enough buy orders to eat up all the sells. And so what happens is, as they try to off ramp and recoup their 100 XLM, they're getting the equivalent of only 1 XLM. So they're losing big time. So Ben from Stellar Russia was like, no, let's teach people. If you don't know what to do, just hold on to it, because Cheesecake will give you a 1-to-1 return, right? So if you did not know that you got scammed, if you spent 100 XLM, you're going to get 100 XLM back. But the bonus is, by time this stuff kind of kicks in the future, we're either going to be right before or at, or maybe even after when Bretton Woods 3 kicks in. So your 100 XLM might have been worth, let's say $10, but it could be worth, I don't know, $100, $1,000. I don't know what it's going to be worth, guys, but it'll be worth more because your XLM will have increased in value. But what Ben is saying now is, he's saying, if you knowingly bought into a scam because you followed the wrong people, despite all the evidence out there telling you guys, don't do it, this is a scam, you're not going to get your investment back. Because now you're knowingly, just like what Nick was saying, you're knowingly participating in a scam, and we cannot have you as active participants in criminal activity.
So do your homework well.
That's known as moral hazard, and I explained this to Emily earlier. That if you know you're getting your money back and you know it's a scam, you could do whatever you want. You could buy as much as you want, because you say, it doesn't matter, even if it is a scam, I'll get my money back. But what you're doing is you're encouraging criminal behavior by doing that. And I use the example of in 2008, the banks made trillions of dollars on these collateralized debt obligations and mortgage obligations. And they over leveraged their balance sheet and they blew themselves up. And lo and behold, the Treasury and the Fed come in and they bail them out, and nothing happens to them. They're fine. All the people lose their houses, they lose their money. So if you reimburse people for buying scam tokens and they're knowingly buying them, that it is a scam. First of all, they're helping perpetuate the scam because they're contributing to it by buying them, and you're also taking away the liability of the scam developers who are creating them, because if people lose no money, then nobody can go after them. So they have to do it, as Emily said, where if you know that you're participating in criminal activity, you're not getting anything, because otherwise you're just going to you're going to facilitate the bad behavior, and there's going to be no ramifications for it. So that's why I was asking Emily, because I wanted to kind of write up something about this. And I'm glad we got that answer, because otherwise it would make no sense whatsoever that somebody who knowingly participating in a scam can get their money back.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it sort of reiterates a little bit of people forget how much more advanced AI is also in behavior modifications and responses. We don't have purview, but I'm sure that it's light years ahead in advance of us. And so I'm sure that they're monitoring us on just how we view this and how we behave towards investments and opportunities and things like that. So something as repeatable as that, I think you can be sure that you're being watched and you'll be kicked out of the game. So yeah, we forget about those
things. Emily
things.
at QSI have been very, very vocal about this whole thing.
We've been shouting it from the rooftops, Nick and myself.
Yeah, I mean, everybody by now should have heard from some source related to QSI that it's being verbalized constantly and being posted about. So I mean, if you do it anyway because you like the person that happens to be working with the developer, you know what? Then that you made a bad decision, because you shouldn't be rewarded or get anything back for choosing to work with a scammer. That's really what it comes down to. I hate to say it that way, but that's the reality of it. So this is the just way and the right way to handle that particular scenario. So it's not like you weren't warned. That's for it's like every 10 minutes we have a post on it with regards to a warning of a scam. So, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and if I kind of piggyback off of what Nick is saying a second ago, so this is something that was even more, I guess, impactful to me. So I was having, again, it's another conversation with Ben. Actually, before I mention this, I want to go back to what you were talking about, Susanna, about how the white hats are watching everything, right? Because it's not just the AI behind the scenes with their ability to read intent, but even think about it from a very baseline level that we can all understand. Because, the three of us, we operate in Telegram, and everybody in QSI is in Telegram. And a lot of the crypto stuff is also in Telegram too. And of course it's in, other, Twitter and Instagram and stuff like that as well. But our hub is in Telegram. And that's where we see the vast majority of the scams going on between the Kazarian scammers and these developer scammers. It's kind of like, I wouldn't estimate 90, 95%, if not more, of the scams. And the reason why that's really important to know is because Telegram isn't just a Russian app. I know people know that it's two brothers are Russians, but a lot of people don't know, even though I've actually mentioned this before, is that Pavel Durov is one of Ben's best friends growing up.
Wow.
So talk about quantum entanglement, guys. They can see everything. The white hats can see everything. And you cannot escape it because you're literally playing in the white hats playground at this moment.
And you figure sorry, but you figure that the black hats or these people, imposters, would already know that. I mean, they're hackers, they're hacking. They don't know this yet?
You would think they would, but honestly, they do what they do because they think they can get away with it, because they always think they're smarter. But, the white hats are sitting there chuckling because between our team collecting all these, screenshots and audio confessions of what people are doing, they're over there with their AI regularly scraping all the data behind the scenes. But so I want to go back to what Nick was saying a second ago about, how it's really like you have to almost want to choose to follow the wrong people. And Susanna, you and I have talked about in the past a lot about how it's down to frequency, right? Certain people at a certain frequency will vibrate with this information because it's energy based now. Well, so if I go back to my discussion with Ben, so this is from a couple of days ago, and it's talking about psychology, because we discovered yet another RV guru, another person with millions of followers all over the world. And they were trying to actually partner with QSI. So of course I got to do my due diligence in the background to make sure that they're legitimate or not. We don't want to have another Charlie Ward situation or, Mel Carmine situation, et cetera. And so, I started looking at a lot of the information that they were posting, and all these little bubbles kept popping up at me like, this doesn't sound right. Mm. And so I double checked a lot of the information with some of these white hat developers. And of course, one by one, debunk, 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 debunk. And so I was sitting there going, it can get very frustrating because you have how many RV people out there who give themselves the title guru, who, like, what qualifies them to be gurus if they're constantly giving bad information? And then you have millions of people who follow bad information all day long, some people for years or decades. And I was like, how is it possible that we're putting out the good information and we're one of the only ones putting out good information, not because we're better than anybody, Susanna, because we're one of the only ones who actually roll up our sleeves and do the research and dig into the documents. That takes hundreds of hours. There are not many people who do that. But because we're willing to do that, Nick as well, and there's some other great people, like there's a guy named David who is his name is known as Stellarpreneur X now. Between the three of us and a couple of others, we have literally spent thousands, in some cases, tens of thousands of hours of research studying this kind of stuff so that we know what we're talking about and we have the proofs, the evidence, the public confirmations to show everybody. So I was like, QSI is roughly 50,000 people. How do we grow 50,000 people into 5 million people? And so Ben's response to me was all about psychology. People will want to follow where they would like to follow, not what they need, right? It's that whole like versus want, I want versus what I need, rather. And so they'll like people who tell them things that are pretty, like the RV is now, the event is now, and they're going to give you 10 million for your one token, or they're going to give you $500,000 for your one XRP, or your RV, your physical RV currency, your dong, your dinar, your whatever. It's going to give you whatever millions, whatever trillions for $1, right? They give you these fantastical numbers so that you follow them because you believe in that out of hopium. But guys, hopium, the root is opium. It's still a drug. It's still dangerous for you. And so what it comes down to with frequency and vibration is Ben gave me this very important phrase, and he says, only the people who are willing to accept the truth, even if it is not what they want to hear, are the ones who will become the decision makers. That is so significant to me, guys, because that tells me two different things right now. One, it doesn't just tie into your ability to become a humanitarian and be able to receive the funding because maybe you were led astray buying the wrong stuff. But more importantly, now he's talking about decision makers. That means you have to have responsibility. And there's no way the white hats are going to give you whatever amount of zeros behind your name if you are irresponsible, if you have no discernment, if you have no credibility, you have zero integrity, and you just follow bad advice all the time and do really silly, stupid things. It's not going to happen, guys. You've got to have sovereignty. You have to be responsible for your actions. And people make mistakes all the time. I do all the time. It's not about making mistakes. It's about owning up to them and learning from them afterwards. And the more you learn, the fewer mistakes you make, hopefully, in the future.
Yeah, but it's not easy to cut through the noise. And I think it has become an art. And I have to say that I think that the quantum stellar community has gotten so good at cutting the noise out. So it's an inherited thing. I mean, it's just becoming so easy to just walk that path, but to show and demonstrate and actually lead the horse to drink the water, it's a lot harder. So yeah, kudos to all of you. I mean, I think that it's beyond common sense. It goes
Yeah.
so much
In the
deeper.
end,
It's
it's not for
beyond common
everybody, right?
sense.
The end is
Yeah,
not for everybody.
it's
And you're
not.
seeing a lot of people drop off, and I think there's going to be a huge drop off right before things really start to happen, because those people, like Emily said, are not meant to be in a position where they're going to be making decisions on important things that we need to do in the world going forward. So it can't just be that you happen to buy something, and then regardless of anything else you believe, you're just going to get a whole bunch of money. It doesn't make any sense, and that's why I was saying to Emily as well. It's good that the community that attacks us constantly doesn't believe in anything, doesn't think anything is going to, because we don't want them as part of the new world going forward. So as much as we don't like the attacking, it's good, because the end result will be that we won't have people who really don't have their heart in, rebuilding the world and being humanitarians and helping others in the equation going forward. So that's important.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember, guys, that nobody here is saying that we don't want people in the system, right? All of us want people to learn and grow and have abundance for their families and for their future. And unlike other communities, we never say we're the chosen ones. We actually say everybody's the chosen one, but you have to choose to be here. But that being said, you can choose to be in our community, but you can also choose to leave our community, or you can choose to attack our community. Everything is a choice. And so again, guys, that's why it's based on frequency and vibration.
Yeah, and I
So
think it's one of the best ones. I think it's one of the best channels so far, bar none. I can't find anybody with that kind of vibe. It's just
thank you,
wonderful.
Anna. Well, it's because of awesome people like you two, because, honestly, it's the collective effort, right? I can't run everything by myself. I can't do all the intel by myself either. So I have to look for people who have the same kind of integrity and same kind of research background and skills that I have. That way, collectively, we help teach everybody, at least everybody who's open to learning what we know.
Yeah, and it's
So
yeah,
definitely
but kudos to you, because there's so much work. And I just want to mention one more thing to anybody who's considering to join, because not every time I can spend time and look at all the podcasts and everything and keep up. It's hard to keep up with your information because everything is coming so fast. I mean, there's so many new developments, but it should not be discouraging either for all those who want to join. Just take your time, take it easy. There's plenty of time, guys. There's plenty of time, and the more you know, the better you will be at the end of the tunnel, which is hopefully coming soon. So anyways, I just wanted to give that little word of advice, because
Yeah,
I
and the
have
more you
a
know, the
hard
more
time.
conviction you have in what you're doing. If you
Yeah,
don't know, it's easy to be fooled. But if you have the knowledge about what really is going on, you can't be fooled that easily. And not only that, you have more confidence to ride through the rough patches, of which there have been many throughout the last, year and a half, 2 years. So that's important too. Yeah, you need to roll up your sleeves a little bit at least, and take some responsibility for understanding and learning some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a side, if you are brand new, you're listening to the call and you're not in QSI, before you join our chat channel, because it's actually a closed community, anybody can see our public intel channel, which is at Quantum Stellar Initiative. Make sure you spell it properly, or else she'll get a scam channel pretending to be us. But our chat channel is closed off because we now have a prerequisite to join. That way, well, let me back up. The reason why we closed it off is because there are so many scammers out there, just like what you were saying earlier, Susanna. They troll through our chat. They look for everybody. They start to PM them, private message them. And that's how so many people get scammed. That is probably 95% of the people that get scammed is through a PM. Some of them, the others are through emails and websites. But so in order to help stem some of that corruption, we closed down the chat, and people now have to go through our beginners training course, which is 3 different modules. It goes through what is the QFS, how does Stellar, Ripple, XRP play a role in all this? How do the Trump's executive orders, USMCA Act, tie into the transfer of wealth, right? So you have that background fundamental knowledge, which Nick just referred to. That's module 1. Then you take a quiz. Then you go into module 2. Module 2 is like, what are the basics? How do you create a Stellar wallet? How do you do some, funding for it? How do you do some basic trading for it? That way, the how-tos before you ever join. And then you proceed on to the third module, which is a little bit more intermediate. So if you would like to participate in our group funds for our ICOs, then you know all the proper protocols for it because you have to follow instructions. And if you don't, then your wallet is disqualified or your investment is disqualified. So we do everything in our power possible to set people up for success before they come and they join a chat. That way they know what they're doing, their investments count, and more importantly, they don't get scammed by all the pesky people sitting in PMs waiting for them.
Bravo. So where do you want to go? Can we move forward and see when SEP 40 is coming? What's the future? What is it more or less what you've heard from the Russian army, the Stellar Russia? What's happening in the next few months coming forward, between now and November? What's the scenario?
Yeah. So I'm not going to go through this slide. I'm just leaving it on the screen so people can come back and read it later on. But this was a quick summary of our SEPs that we did 1 through 40 last week. That way, take your time, go through the reading, and understand that this is all being programmed into the Stellar ecosystem. Now, this is actually more specifically what you're asking about. What is the upcoming deadline? Sorry, not deadline. What is the upcoming timeline in the prior deadlines? So what gets really interesting, Susanna, is as I was updating the slide for today's call, I actually only changed one thing from July backwards. Only one thing changed. I moved Ethereum Pathfinder from June down to July. Everything else has stayed the same. And so that tells me that, when you follow the Stellar deadlines and the timelines of what's happening, down the chain, it's a much more accurate, in my opinion, version of trying to predict what's happening than if you follow all the other intel, like, which comet is hitting or which country is going to fake invade another country or what happened with the elections and stuff like that. So if we look at, let's talk about July, because we're in July right now, right? July 1st, we just had that massive deadline where baked into, I think it was the Federal Reserve or the SEC, I can't remember which one it was. They have, it's called card not present. So you had to have a minimum of 2 channels for card not present for it to qualify. And that's really important because what they're building is all of these on and off ramps for us. We mentioned earlier things like MoneyGram or Western Union, Visa, MasterCard, but there's so much more, right? I think most people will probably pay through stuff like Zelle, PayPal, Cash App, etc. But in Europe, Asia, Africa, they have all these other systems too. So in the scenes, like in the background scenes, they've been building all these on and off ramps with all those financial infrastructures at the same time too. That way, every single version of sending money, whether you have a bank account or not, whether it's digital or physical, everything's being bridged together. Now, on top of that, July 2, we mentioned a second ago, because you already somehow knew through quantum entanglement that we were going to talk about this. But yes, all the banks, all the quantum compliant banks had their deadline to upgrade their system. That was July 2. So now today is what? July 17. So upcoming, we have Fedwire coming in, but also upcoming, I can't give you a date just yet. I do know the date. I've been talking to the developers about this. Officially, the Ethereum Pathfinder is coming, and it's so far being scheduled for the month of July. So the reason why this is important, guys, is because quick history on Ethereum. Long time ago, Ethereum 2.0 upgrade was designed to do a fork, right? So they did do their hard fork, but what a lot of people didn't know, which is what I've been teaching about since 2021, is they've been building a bridge to start being able to interoperate with Stellar, which means their security has to go up, their speed of transaction has to go up, and all of the exchanges through the different networks has to be integrated into the system. So Ethereum originally was going to have just one upgrade, a 2.0. And then what ended up happening is at the beginning of last year, they said, okay, well, we're not going to do, sorry, at the end of last year, we're not going to do one massive upgrade. It's too much. It's too big. We're going to break it into 2. So the first section was Ethereum Shanghai. That was in April. Okay. And again, as a reminder, Shanghai had account abstraction, which is how you can go and you can recover old wallets. But another really major part of that is something called, they programmed it into their Shanghai upgrade, but it's a piece of the upgrade called the self-destruct button. They literally called it the self-destruct button. And that was the Shanghai upgrade. And that ties into PBFT, which we talked about earlier on this call.
Mm-hmm.
So what is Pathfinder then? Pathfinder is all the bridges now into Stellar. So recently we just launched 3 of the big Ethereum bridges. We had Gnosis, Avalanche, and then just the other day we had Polygon. I think that was yesterday maybe, we had Polygon. So these are the 3 major Ethereum bridges that everybody, who studies crypto knows about. But soon we'll be having the seal the deal of all the rest of Ethereum coming, and that's the Pathfinder upgrade. And that's coming down the pipeline in the next couple of weeks. So that's coming. We have more bridges for the non-Ethereum blockchains as well. So this entire month of July, pretty much, I've been nicknaming the bridge to Terabithia, because if you remember that, that old book from a long time ago, it's all about building this magical universe that, little kids made up. Beautiful system. So we're building the bridges to Terabithia in July and kind of trickling into the early couple days of August, because they have to put all the bridges in, so all the assets, all the blockchains come into Stellar. Now, when we talk about the timing of stuff, because that's what people want to know, people don't care when it's being built. They only care when it's going to end, right?
Right.
So I don't want to give a hard date because the hard date is not known. And I want to repeat that. The hard date is not known because it's tied to programming. And anybody, and Nick can attest to this as well, anybody who's ever had to test something, especially technology, knows that you never say, this is the final day. Because what happens is, this is the day you start testing, and along the line, you're like, oh, crap, we made a mistake. We got to redo this thing. So that deadline is a soft deadline, and it keeps moving, okay? So that's why, again, if you're listening to an RV person or an Intel person, and they're telling you, this day is the day, they're liars. They're liars because they don't know, because the white hats don't even know, because they're still testing it. But what I can tell you is developers have been saying on average, we need 1 to 2 months of testing. When I hear 1 to 2 months, I think, okay, let's give them some buffer. Let's give them another half month. Let's give them maybe another extra month just to be on the safe side. So let's say 3 months out. So now let's put some dates to this, okay? If the bridges are coming in to Stellar and they're coming through July, but into August, and we also know that some really important key pieces besides bridges, which I have the names of, but I'm not going to release them because that's how you minimize the scammers coming after us. But just know that for the months of July and August are going to be some of the biggest ICOs you'll ever fathom. Now we're looking at the deadline at the end of August to really kind of like put the major pieces in. So now let's count out 2 to 3 months. September, October, November. I would say comfortably sometime between the end of October and the end of November is when you're going to start to see some really big updates. Now, when I tie this back to what developers have been telling me over the last 1 to 2 weeks, I've been hearing this from multiple developers, multiple teams, which means multiple countries' developers, okay? So it's not just Russians at this point, it's the global developers. They're now telling me a couple key things. One is the Indus Payments developer reached out a couple weeks ago, and they said, the whole thing about XRP Bridge and XRP Bank and how that ties to passive income. But he also mentioned that there's something that they're working on in the background, which that something also ties into Venezuela, Russia. And it also ties into Ralph of SPIA, right? Because SPIA is one of the big governance layers, right? So they have a triangle of developers right now. All 3 developers combined have talked about how when, a lot of these bridges are built, the public has to start knowing about this, because right now it's so under the table. Everything is under NDA, which is the reason why only people like us who can decode, right, who understand military intelligence, can see through the NDAs and put the pieces together. But how do you get the other 7 to 8 billion people on? You have to lift the NDAs, guys. Things have to become public at some point. So they've been talking about how they're shooting for the end of October, but into November is when the banks themselves will start to announce publicly that they're using Stellar. And one by one, not just Stellar, but they'll start to say, these are the assets that we're using. So the developers have been saying possibly November, but moving forward after November, you'll start to see public recognition.
Great
So that
marketing.
that ties into exactly the timeline that I just gave you based on some pretty simple math right now.
Exactly. And who has that infrastructure if not the banks? They already have the clientele. They already have it. So it's that's easy peasy. Marketing, branding is included. I mean, it's just perfect. They do all the legwork for you.
And think about all the banks have been doing upgrades. And so people have been getting emails or texts or phone calls saying, hey, our bank's going to be down this day or this weekend. We're upgrading our system.
That's right.
That's how they could also do this, right? They could say, oh, hey, by the way, guys, we just upgraded to this quantum financial system or whatever they're going to call that new thing in the future. And by the way, you now have this new account over here. If you want to collect it, then click on this button over here. It's going to pop out and here you are, right? Like they can do all the legwork. We don't have to do it anymore. We can still facilitate it, but it's going to become easier and easier.
Right. And it's great because there has been so much backlash, especially so much confusion and so much fear mongering on what this is really all about, because the old ideology that this is going to give us, we're going to a one world order is not happening at all. So, to take all that pressure from it, what better than to have the banks do their easy updates, just like we update any app. It's not a big deal. Nobody questions. It is what it is. And we move on. And that is great. That is great. Fabulous. Fabulous. Well, Emily, you gave us, again, a breathtaking, in-depth journey of everything. And you condensed everything so well. I appreciate your time. Nick, I also appreciate your time. And thank you so much, Nick, for coming on other occasions when Emily hasn't been able to. Because she's very, very busy. And I really look forward to our next podcast, our next chapter, when you are ready. Well, it's not you, it's actually the developers. She's going to have some very, the new insights of what's happening into the XRP, Bitcoin, and all those, but more importantly to XRP. I think there's this great story brewing out there that I am very, very happy that you're considering me to do the podcast on.
Not just considering, Susanna, we're going to do it exclusively through you. And then afterwards, we'll make some posts for the channel because you have been just a joy, a pleasure to work with, not only because you're so professional and you really do your research and you understand what's going on, but you are just an amazing person. And I think there's no one better to facilitate the journey of XRP, especially because of what we've been going through, mirrored with what you've personally been going through on this XRP journey. So thank you for giving us the honor.
Yeah.
That Emily, no, don't get teary-eyed with me because I met you first time, I saw your face a year and a half ago. You were on Mel's show and I just fell in love with your whole aura. I mean, your aura was this big. But I just don't, some things are not fair. And so we just move on, continue on, we keep our head high and continue this journey because it's a difficult one. So my heart's to you because you've been, I have no words. I really don't have any words, but you do not deserve it. Neither anybody on the QSI. And it's just because we do our research. So I'm very, very honored to be part of this community. It's just, there's no other way.
We don't join anybody's shows. So, I mean, that should tell you in and of itself how we feel about you as well.
Well, thank you so much. We'll be back with you all, hopefully in a week or two. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susanna.
Thank you, Susanna.